Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I'm going to continue my series on first-person graphics, and I'm going to start to show you how you might go about making your own first-person graphics. Now, you might say, well, I don't want to make my own first-person graphics. I want to just download something that someone else has made and use that, and that's fair enough. The graphics that I used in the previous video and the video before that, I didn't make those. I downloaded those. I got those from Open Game Art, which is the site that I usually use for getting computer artwork, and I will link to that in the description of this video. I would recommend at least having a listen to this video, even if you don't intend to make your own artwork, because it will give you a better idea of why things are laid out the way they are, and I think it will make it a bit easier to use other people's artwork, to understand what bit's meant to go where. But yeah, you can certainly use other people's artwork. That's why Open Game Art exists. I am using GIMP, a free program that sort of mimics the functionality of Photoshop. Again, I will link to GIMP in the description of this video. Obviously, if you're using a different program, the specific commands that I'm using won't be the same, but of course the steps will be basically the same. All right, so we're here, we've opened the program. Obviously, the first thing we need to do is create a new picture. So I'm going to do that. I want a sort of old school look with kind of chunky pixels, I suppose. And so I'm making a quite small picture, 161 by 121, and then I'm going to blow that up to expand it in the way that I demonstrated in my previous video. I've chosen an odd number for both the width and the height, and the reason for that is because that means that there is a specific single pixel that is the center of the picture. So why do you want a specific pixel to be the center of the picture? Well, because we'll be dealing with perspective, and because we'll be dealing with perspective, as you probably know, perspective lines sort of seem to converge at a point, and it's easier if we have a specific pixel that is that vanishing point. So odd numbers. The exact size, I'm not saying it has to be 161 and 121, but I would recommend an odd number. All right, so we have this picture. If we want to make it bigger or smaller, you can use Control plus Shift plus J. That will fill the screen with the picture. That's if you're using a PC. If you're using a Mac, it is Command plus Shift plus J. I'll probably be using those interchangeably. I might say Command sometimes, I might say Control. Just bear in mind they're the same thing. They're the equivalent on different types of computer. So we can fill the screen that way. If we press minus, that will make it smaller, sort of stage by stage. And if we press plus, which involves using the Shift key, that will make it bigger. That's like the opposite. And we will also be zooming into specific bits using the, what's that, it's called the zoom tool, the magnifying glass. That's the thing I was thinking of. All right, so I've got this picture. We don't want that yellow, that solid yellow. So we go Control A, which selects everything. Oh, no, sorry. That won't work. We need to give it an alpha channel first. So we right-click on the layer and we choose Add Alpha Channel. And what that does is it allows you to make parts or all of the picture transparent. Okay, so having done that, we go Control A to select everything, and then we go Control X to cut everything we've selected, and we get this checkered pattern of dark and light grey, which is how GIMP tells you that that bit's transparent. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we need to draw a line from this top left corner to the bottom right corner, and a similar line from the other two corners. So we choose the pencil tool. Now this is 1 pixel, it's already set to 1 pixel, but if yours isn't, you would go to Windows, Dockable Dialogues, Tool Options, and you would adjust the size of the brush. So if you click and it looks like that or something like that, you would Windows, Dockable Dialogues, Tool Options, and you can move it up and down there, or you can actually type in the number that in this bit here if you want to. But either way, we move it down to 1, and we might as well X out of that because we don't need it anymore. So we're going to go to this corner, click on a single pixel. So as you can see, I've zoomed right in, so the 1 pixel is really big. Then we scroll to the opposite corner, and we go Shift and click, and that creates a straight line from the last bit that we clicked. All right, so we got this line that goes from top right to bottom left. I could do the same thing with the other corners. What I usually do instead is I go Duplicate, Layer, Transform, Flip Horizontal. Oh, well, actually Flip Vertically works as well. And so we have those 2 lines, and then we right click on the layer and merge down, and that will create a single layer. So we have these lines. Now, it'll make it easier to sort of visualize and imagine what's happening if you think about this as being in a very long featureless corridor. Let's say you were in a very long featureless corridor. What would you see? Well, you'd see 2 walls to either side of you, and then there'd be a floor below you and a ceiling above, and they would, as it got further away, they would occupy less and less space in your eye, in the sort of your mind's picture, and eventually they would seem to meet at a single point. Floor, ceiling, and the 2 walls would seem to meet at a single sort of infinitely far away point. So unless there was something in the way. So stop thinking of this as an X and start thinking of it as a sort of 3-dimensional representation of a very long corridor, and that will make it a bit easier to imagine what's happening, what's being represented here. Okay, so we need to think about the environment that we're in is it's stored in a 2-dimensional array. So you can imagine it as a 2-dimensional grid made up of squares, and we need to represent the square that the player character is standing on, which will be sort of down the bottom here, and then the square in front of them will be sort of up here, and then the square in front of that will be up here, and so on. That's what we're about to do. So I'm going to go Layer, New Layer. I will not choose Transparency, I'll choose Foreground Color. And so we have this sort of solid field of, in this case, yellow. The colors don't matter, they're just to distinguish the different layers, you'll see. So I'm going to go Layer, Scale, and I'm going to change it from pixels to percent. And I'm going to change it to 75. You might use a slightly different number for this one, and when I choose it changes it slightly because it can only make whole numbers. It can only make the size of each layer a whole number, and so obviously 75% of 161 and 121 aren't whole numbers, so it's finding the sort of nearest number of pixels that will give me nearest to 75. And we scale that. Okay, so now I'd like you to imagine this transparent bit down here. Imagine that as being the square that the player is standing on. And then this yellow represents the next square, and we want to represent the square beyond that as well, of course. So we're going to duplicate the layer, and change the color. In this case, I'm just going to invert it, but I could also use this bucket fill tool to change it. But either way, now we're going to go layer, scale layer, and I'm going to choose 50%. Again, you could choose a different number to 50%, but I would recommend using the same number for this transformation and the one we're about to do next. It will probably look a bit weird if you use different numbers. So we scale that, and then let's do one more. We'll go duplicate layer, we'll change it to red, we'll fill it in to be red, and we'll scale that, and we'll scale that to 50% again. All right, so we'll put this the perspective lines on the top. That will make more sense. And while we're here, we might as well double click in the name of this, and instead of calling it background, we'll call it perspective lines. Now, you'll notice there's one very important thing that I haven't been doing, and that is saving as I go. I'm not going to save as I go because I've already got this stuff, so I don't need to. But of course, if you're doing this, you should be, saving after each step. All right, so imagine that this transparent bit here is the floor that is on the square that you're in. This is a wall immediately beside you, and this is the ceiling. And imagine that the yellow bit represents a square ahead of you, and then these two side bits are walls, and that's the ceiling. And then the blue represents the square ahead of that, and then the red represents the square ahead of that. Now we could keep going indefinitely, but the longer we go, the more complicated it's going to be. And for the purposes of demonstration, I might cut it off after two squares. So to remind myself that the next one is sort of darkness, I might just fill this one in with black, and that just makes it easier. All right, so now we have to make sure that the coloured squares are sort of aligned with the perspective line, like they might be off by a pixel or two. So let's have a look. So that's what we want. We want the corner of the thing to we want the line to be exactly there. And that seems fine on that side. And it actually seems fine on that side as well. So that's good. So let's look at the blue. Okay, that doesn't look quite right. It looks okay there, but it looks like it could be moved over. Maybe it could be moved over one, perhaps. Now you might decide that doesn't matter, but if you're a bit pedantic, like me, you might say, well, what if I move it down one? Well, that won't work, because then, like, if we move it down one, that will be okay, but the next one won't be. So what I think I'll do is I might move it in one. I'll move it in one and down one. All right, so we go layer, scale. We have to click this chain. What this chain means is that if you make a change here, it'll make a change automatically to the other dimension, and that's not what we want. So I'll unlink those, and we move back to pixels. And instead of 61 and 46, I might make it 60 and 45. And I think that might, oops, I think that might be better. Yep, we've got a black line in the corner of each one of those. All right, so now let's finally have a look at the black one. That we can sort of tell that that's off straight away. So maybe we'll move that one down by one. Oh. I think that is, yeah. Okay, so we've got them all lined up. Again, this would be a good opportunity to save. So again, bear in mind the yellow represents The transparent represents the square you're on, and it's like floor, walls, and ceiling. The yellow is 1 square forward, the blue is 1 square forward of that, and the black is sort of darkness. It's the bit we're not going to bother with. Although, of course, we could keep going. Now, we don't want these to be coloured, not yet. We're going to colour them in, but at the moment we want them to just be frames. So the way to do that, we pick a layer, we Control A. Well, I mean, it's already selected all of them, but just in case it hadn't, we Control A. We select, we shrink by 1, and I've got the wrong one. Hang on. Yeah, no, I made a mistake there. Sorry about that. All right, what I'm trying to do is I want to select the yellow bit, but nothing else. So I'm going to choose the magic wand here, the fuzzy select tool as it's called. Make sure I'm on the yellow layer. Click on there, and it should have selected just the yellow. All right, then I go select, shrink by 1. And then I'm going to choose Control X to cut everything except a frame. And then I'm going to fill, I press Control A again, and then I click on that pixel and I change it to black. All right, so now I'm going to do the same to the blue. You go select, shrink, 1, Control X, Control A, bucket fill. What's its official name? Yeah, it is called bucket fill. Okay, bucket fill. Okay, so now we have some frames. So what is the point of that? Well, I've said, imagine that you're in a corridor. But, of course, you're not necessarily going to be in a corridor. You don't know that there's going to be a wall here and a wall here and a wall here. This might be open. So we need to have some way of representing what you'd see if that was open and we were dealing with the squares that are sort of to one side of being directly in front of you. So the way we do that is we copy these smaller squares and we move them over. So we get on the layer that we want to duplicate. Let's start with the big one, actually. So you can check which layer a given thing is by clicking that eye thing. That turns it off and on, and so you can see what's on that layer. So I will duplicate the layer, and I will move it over, and I might have to zoom in to make sure that I get this right exactly, but we want this new one to overlap with the old one, like that. And then we duplicate that layer, and we move it over there. And again, we might have to zoom in. And again, this is probably where I would save it. Now, we're going to do the same thing, of course, with this layer. And then we're going to label everything, because it's sort of starting to get a bit confusing. So we don't want them to be next to each other like that. We want to be overlapping by 1 pixel like that. And then we duplicate that. And again, I'll zoom in just to, I think I've got that right, but I'll zoom in just to make sure that I've got it right. Oops, moved the wrong layer. Yep, that looks right. Okay, so what have we done here? What is this? Well, let's say you had a cube that was one space forward and one space to the right of the square where you were in. In other words, let's say the square that you're in is obviously open, because if it wasn't open, you couldn't move into it. And we're assuming that we have a simple environment where there's either open space. Every given square is either open space or it's a wall. So let's say you're standing on open space. The square ahead of you is open space, and the square that is to your right, that is forward and to the right of you, is filled in. How would you represent that? Well, you would probably represent it by filling in this line here in red, this line here in red, this line here in red, this line here, and then those two lines up there. If we do that, we are outlining the shape of a cube that is one forward and one to the right of you. So let's briefly do that. I might not get it. I might be off by a single pixel, but this will be good enough to show you what I mean. Okay, so yeah, sorry. I mean, I've got that off a bit, but if you look at just that cube, if we were to get rid of all of the black and keep only the red, you can imagine that that is like a picture of a cube that is forward and to the right of you. And it is sort of correct in terms of the very simple perspective that we've set up. And the same is true of if you had let's say that's not the case. Let's say instead you had a cube immediately to the right of you. Well, in that case, you'd fill in that one. And again, this might not be to the pixel, but it'll give you an idea. If we had a cube there, that would represent a cube being immediately to the right of the square that you're standing on. And again, it would be compatible in terms of perspective. And let's say that there was an empty space forward and to the right of you, but then there was a cube after that. Well, you could represent that oops, sorry. Actually, I'll do that one a bit better. There we go. So if you look at just the red and the blue, we have a way of representing. There's empty space in front of you. There's a cube to the right of you. Forward and to the right of you, there's an empty square. And then forward of that, there's a blue cube. So we've represented this sort of simple part of the environment in a way that looks consistent, that looks right. So in other words, what we've done is we've created a kind of skeleton or a kind of framework of all of the possible lines that we might fill in. And by filling in some of these lines and not others, we can represent any possible arrangement of cubes and open space in the immediate environment. And it will look consistent, it will look right. So I will leave it there, but I will quickly tell you that the next thing we'll be doing is thinking about all of the possibilities for what might be on and off, as it were, what might be open space or walls, and how we might represent all of those, and then how we're going to break those down into chunks so that we don't have to do a separate picture for each possibility. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to split the screen up into sort of right, centre and left, and we're going to have separate separate small graphics, which are then combined to create the whole view. But I will leave it there. As I said, it's a big topic, and I don't want to sort of say too much in a single video and overwhelm you, so I will leave it there. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.